please welcome the moderator of our next discussion, the distinguished Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent for NBC News, Miss Andrea Mitchell.
Thank you all so very much. The mics are on. Thank you. I'm Andrea Mitchell from NBC News and a proud board member of America's Promise and old enough to have been there 20 years ago, which is in my hometown of Philadelphia. So this is a very meaningful summit. I'm very privileged to be here. We're here with Jake Schwartz, the CEO of General Assembly, a company focused on supporting individuals with the training and skills that they need to compete, and Laisha Ward of Target Corporation, a company with a long-time commitment to its local and national philanthropy in helping young people achieve all that we need for them to achieve. First to you, Laisha, let's talk about what you're doing in Minneapolis and elsewhere around the country in terms of the business commitment to making America's Promise a reality.
Well, Andrea, thank you for your longstanding commitment to America's Promise. I think it's so important to serve, and you've been a role model of service and certainly been a champion of helping to tell the important stories about this work. And so I think I'd be remiss if I didn't start with a thank you, because so often stories are only negative in nature about either young people or education. And so it's really important to change that narrative and to highlight the good work that is happening in our communities, and you're an advocate for that, so thank you.
Well,
so for Andrea.
In fact, we're always, especially at moments like this, the bipartisanship, and we heard from President Clinton this morning about what 5 American presidents, and of course Nancy Reagan representing Ronald Reagan, did, and that is exactly what our country needs.
Absolutely. And I do think it's important to think about the broader ecosystem in this work. And so, Target is a large Fortune 500 company, and we think of ourselves as a part of the solution. And it's a moment in time where you can't sit on the sideline. And I think a lot of what has made our commitment real and authentic is we're a purpose-driven company. So it's important to really think about, why do you exist in the world? And for us, it's more than about ensuring that we're profitable. Certainly profits do matter when you're a publicly traded company, but we think about the triple bottom line. It's important to ensure that we're thinking about our profits, our people, and the planet, and how is it that we can solve problems in the world and ensure that we're driving business, social, and environmental impact in our work. And that started with a founding family who believed that they should tithe in their faith, but that they thought their company should tithe as well. And so we were founded on the premise that we would do good deeds through our business assets. And those business assets include allocating 5% of our profits back to the communities in which we do business. And that's a philanthropic investment. Those are in-kind donations. But over the last several years, our team members, which is what we call our employees, have also donated more than 1 million hours of volunteer service. And so it's this notion of time and talent, pro bono service, intellectual capital, that is a really important part of what we bring to the table as an asset, as a company. And then finally, I might say, in addition to those philanthropic resources and our time, this idea of being a successful company is a part of what we bring to the world. We provide jobs, right? Leadership development, the taxes that we pay. We're often going into neighborhoods that are underserved, perhaps where there are food deserts or places where they have to travel for miles to get things that are affordable. So just making the kind of business that we have accessible to communities is an important part of what I think we bring to the table. And so it's this idea of what I call conscientious capitalism, right? It's important to do well while doing good, and it's in fact an obligation. And so that's been sort of the mission and journey that we've been on and are still on, and are hoping to continue to improve the kind of outcomes as a result of that premise.
And Jake, you're here in New York City, and Mark, we just saw by video, was inspired 20 years ago by the launch of this extraordinary organization. And you are here, living up to that commitment, the 1-1-1 commitment. Tell us more about what you're doing in New York.
Yeah, so, well, we've set up a part of our company to really address some of the issues around diversity in technology, and we help other companies and individuals sort of sponsor individuals through our programs to then get high-paying, high-growth jobs in technology. But I would say, in a lot of ways, we sort of come from this new generation of entrepreneurship where, from day one when we started our company, we were thinking about the impact that we might have on the world. And we really didn't want to ever separate the business we were building from that impact. And so, our mission for a long time has been to empower people to pursue the work they love. And what that really means is helping individuals, but also companies, solve their skills gaps, both those individual skills gaps and the macro skills gaps that we see in society today. And we think there's in some ways no more important issue out there right now that will affect all of us. It'll affect our economic lives, but it'll also affect our political lives, and it'll affect our community. And that's a lot of how we think about our work. Now, sometimes, the day-to-day does not always exactly align to every bit of that impact, but for the most part, that is what gets us out of bed in the morning. It's why people have come to work at GA. And I see a lot of my peers in the community of startups that we are sort of part of, who also feel that same way, that they don't necessarily want to differentiate between the philanthropic side of what they do and the main part of what they do. And that is almost sort of, that's another way of talking about conscientious capitalism. Because there's actually this is not just a marketing ploy or an individual founder's belief. What it really is that to build a sustainable business that is around for a long time, you have to be sustainable to all of your stakeholders. And so doing something that works for you but exploits your community or is overly taxing on your employees or your customers, you're just not going to be in business for very long. And a lot of value will be destroyed in that process. And I think that's really at the core of our philosophy of how we want to help the world. So we work with individuals of all walks and help them sort of get to that next stage in their career. And it's incredibly gratifying. But I'll tell you that I find just as much gratification when we help a large Fortune 500 corporation figure out a new way to recruit a diverse pool of talent into their company to help them go through the transformations they're going through in their own business.
Well, you represent two very different business models, but it's so interesting to hear this mission because it's not public relations, it's not branding, it's really a core value. And how do you find, first to you, Leisha, how do you find that it's good for business to have this spirit, this sensibility, good for recruitment and perhaps reaching a millennial workforce also?
Values matter. At the end of the day, when you think about what's important to your key stakeholders, for us, whether that's shareholders, employees who we want to retain, those that we're trying to recruit, and other key stakeholders across the broad ecosystem, what you stand for matters in the world. And people want an authenticity. They want to be a part of something that's bigger than themselves. And I'm going to keep coming back to what it means to be purpose-driven. Like, why do you exist in the world? What impact do you want to make? How are you improving the lives of others? And what we find is things that are only transactional and appear to being done only on the backs of others aren't sustainable. And those aren't going to create the kind of long-term sustainable relationships that you want to have with your consumers or customers or your employees or the NGO community that you work with your own friends and family. And so it's this idea of developing real relationships that you can nurture, sustain, and grow, that then subsequently allow, again, our business to grow, for the communities that we're a part of to grow, for the leaders whose lives that we touch to continue to grow and have an impact. That's the virtuous circle that we're going after. Otherwise, I think people know when you're being fake, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I think we want to keep it real. Big companies are actually full of people. I mean, so often we get, this company didn't do this, or the company didn't do that. Companies are actually full of human beings. And most of those human beings, I have found, want to make a difference in the world. They want to be a part of making their communities better. And increasingly, what I think you'll find is there's this sort of rising activism from consumers and from employees who are challenging us to be the best versions of ourselves, who really do want to make sure that we're living up to our values. And I find that to be refreshing, and I think it keeps us continually growing and evolving and not being stale, and in many ways taking what is an entrepreneurial spirit that Jake and his team and company are highlighting and bringing that entrepreneurial spirit inside of a large organization like ours. And we talk about it in terms of being intrapreneurial. And so I would challenge all of us to be thinking as entrepreneurs, how are we intrapreneurial and thinking about new ways of challenging what in many ways are old problems, but with that spirit of innovation that's going to be required to push through and to break through what are some of the most challenging problems of our day.
I was wondering how this translates in North Minneapolis, where you're headquartered. Even though you're a global company, we know that it all begins at the local level too.
It does. You make a great point. At the end of the day, politics, education, so many things in life are local. And one of the many things that I have found, quite frankly, disturbing, I lived in Chicago. We heard former Secretary of Education Arne Duncan talk about the challenges in Chicago. I lived and worked and was a part of that community and still considered home. Although I grew up in rural Indiana, so consider those of you from rural settings my peeps as well. But North Minneapolis is a community that in many ways has been forgotten. The Twin Cities in many ways is a tale of two cities. A large number of Fortune 500 companies, more than a city of its size ordinarily would have, and so there are large-scale riches, and yet some of the largest disparities in the country relative to income inequality, housing inequality, education inequality, are actually on the north side of Minneapolis. And that, to me, is unacceptable. A city that could have so much success and educational attainment on the one hand would be leaving such a large segment of the population behind. And so one of the things that we've been trying to do as a coalition is how do you reinvest in the way that allows anchor institutions to move back into those communities, to ensure that you're investing in the whole child and the whole family with supportive services. And what we have found is that education really does become a lever to help end intergenerational poverty when you're able to take really a problem that is often being attacked in a disparate manner by well-meaning but not coordinated efforts, and really forcing an integration across a group of cross-sector leaders, including looking at economic development. So we've, for example, invested in actually bringing large-scale companies back into North Minneapolis. We're doing lease holdings. We're doing kind of unusual business investment models. So when you think about social impact investing, not just philanthropy, but what are you doing to bring business assets and other community assets back into some of the most challenged communities in our cities, of which North Minneapolis is one.
I love this idea because it's also about looking at what's around and what you can reuse or repurpose or reallocate in a way that will serve the whole in a better sense. This is not about charity per se,
No,
right? This is
not.
about creating, again, that word sustainability. And I think a lot of the times, there's this sort of false divide between sort of the stuff we do to help our communities and then business, right? And people think of those as two opposite worlds. But business can be a very effective tool when it's used properly to rebuild communities. But for that to happen, it has to be thought of that way, and you have to be proactive about it. And you need a coalition of community members, other stakeholders, companies, to all sort of envision a future together. And I think to talk about entrepreneurship, I think envisioning that future, painting that picture, and then going and recruiting those stakeholders is the work, right? Regardless of whether you're trying to build a business or a community or a Fortune 500 corporation. Yeah. It's the same thing,
and a
right?
part of that work is getting comfortable being uncomfortable. And certainly one of the things I think I would challenge us all to do is to do a better job of identifying what the problems or challenges are, what the opportunities are like, to get better data. How can we make better data-driven decisions? And in that comes what I think is a very uncomfortable discussion and debate about what's working and what's not. And that's really difficult. It appears like you're picking a favorite child and no one wants to do that.
And how open are business leaders, to each of you? Jake, when you confront businesses with where there are these gaps, and I hear business executives complaining all the time that they can't find the trained workforce, yet this is, a huge gap as technology has advanced education. It's also discriminated against those who don't have access. We know the digital divide.
It's all about data, and it's all about bringing, we have a value at our company, which is bring data to the conversation, always. And a big part of that when we go talk to companies is the data will sit over here, the people making the decisions are over here, and so everybody's just kind of doing the same thing they've always been doing, sort of unthinking and sort of just hoping that something will change in the future. There are some uncomfortable conversations, but I find what actually data does is help ground it in reality, and so you're not debating over that. When you don't have the data, you end up sort of having a more emotional conversation, and that people are more likely to entrench in their sort of already established views. When you have data and you have to solve a mystery, people can sort of open up to new things.
Agreed, and I think it's art and science, right? Data only takes you so far, and you still need to have the capacity to analyze that data and to still bring what is a human and intellectual capacity, curiosity, and an emotional intelligence to ensure that you're developing a solution that takes the data into account as a data point, but not the be-all, end-all, and the ultimate solution.
Jake, here in New York City, when you drill down on what the needs are and how you can bridge those divides, does it seem daunting?
Well, you start small and then you grow from there. So, our story is one of evolution and in partnership in some ways with public institutions. Michael Bloomberg, when he was the mayor, helped us get started with a small grant that helped us sort of get off the ground. And we started with a very modest goal of building a community of entrepreneurs in New York City, which at the time seemed like a very in-need kind of service. And then we started slowly offering classes at night, and those classes started to become more popular, and we started to think, okay, this is interesting. What's behind this? How can we make it even more meaningful? And that's how we started building these sort of 3-month courses that really could transform somebody's career. And so, again, it wasn't a one big swoop of, we're going to solve this whole problem at once. It's let's start and prove that we can do this one thing, and if we can do this one thing, maybe we can do this other thing, and you can sort of expand from there. So we've expanded now to where we have campuses around the world. We're serving tens of thousands of students, but I'm not satisfied yet. I'm very pleased, but there's a lot more to do because our impact right now is still somewhat limited to the tech sectors in the big cities, and for the most part, people who can afford it. And we're asking ourselves a lot of questions about, okay, let's find other skills gaps out there, ones that are a little bit more difficult that, 5 years ago we couldn't have hoped to help contribute to, but now from the stance that we are today and with the experience and the credibility we've built, how do we leverage that even more? And so I think, as we sort of go through that process, it can be daunting if you only think about that far horizon and that's all you think about, right? And I think a lot of people in here are thinking about big visions, big problems they want to solve. And I think this is the other way that being community-minded can help is if you can start locally, if you can think about that. Yeah, you said that, right? Things are very local, and you can prove that something works. There is no absence of desire and need for things that work and people who want to help you scale that. The shortage is of the things that work.
Right.
And so sometimes starting small with that idea that it could someday reach out into a much broader world to me, has been that balance that has helped me as an entrepreneur continue to go forward.
That's the power of innovation, right? It's this idea of testing and failing fast, and then capturing those learnings and iterating in a manner that does take something that can be
Absolutely.
sort of large scale and daunting and make it manageable.
And sometimes when you start small, you know, it's less intimidating, but it also is less threatening. You know, when we started, a lot of people told us we couldn't do what we were going to do. We were essentially inventing a new form of education that didn't exist, existed outside of the realm of regional accreditation or you know, government financing, and people thought we were kind of crazy. And then what happened in our wake is people woke up to the fact that this is possible and are now innovating on that in many different ways.
And on the flip side, we're a $74 billion company, and yet we're thinking about how do you still scale and grow, but remain small, relevant, differentiated, and resonant in a way that meets the need of your evolving consumer, the evolving team member or employee base for us, and just the communities in which we operate in. Because this idea that one size fits all, in many ways, becomes easier often for us, because that helps me do the work. So at the end of the day, we're trying to spend more time making sure that we understand what is it that perhaps has scale across multiple communities where there may be clusters of learning or cohorts. But at the end of the day, even in one city, having lived in Chicago, for example, what's happening in downtown Chicago looks really different than maybe what's happening on the south side of Chicago versus what's happening on the west side versus what's happening up north. And so being really thoughtful about meeting the needs, that's where I think a design thinking framework really helps as well. Who is the end user? What is the problem you're trying to solve? And how do you get insights that allow you to design around it?
We thank you for starting a conversation, which we're going to continue in the larger group and on the margins of this meeting. Laisha Ward, Executive Vice President, Chief External Engagement Officer of Target, and Jake Schwartz, the CEO of General Assembly. Thank you both so very much.